everybody, and welcome to the lounge this Friday evening. How's everybody doing out there? We are still in our lovely Mercury retrograde, coming to the end of this chapter in a few days. Aren't you guys excited? We have 4 other planets in retrograde at the time, but we are still able to move a little bit forward on our dreams and goals because we had our lovely eclipse, which puts us in a position to move forward through transcendence, through transformation, and to coming into a new beginning on a lot of levels, universally, physically, mentally, spiritually, on all those levels. Hi, Lori. How you doing? Thank God it's Friday. You're right. I cannot wait for our guest to come on tonight. I'm going to talk a little bit about him. It's 2:00 in the morning where he's at right now, and I really appreciate him coming on tonight all the way from Scotland. Yes, we have a guest from around the world, and I'm so excited to interview him. I was able to speak with him prior to the show and do a little pre-interview, and finding out from him how really data-driven he is, how really analytical he is. He believes in science, and I just can't wait to hear about how these two things in his mind interact, the afterlife and being a medical doctor and researching all of this. He is really looking at the empirical data and truly believes that life does go on. So if you've lost a loved one, this is a show to come to tonight to really look at the evidence, because I've done readings for 23 years, and there's times I'm still a little skeptical because God didn't come down in a burning bush. And there's times where I'm still questioning things a little bit. So for me, this is an awesome time to speak to somebody like this. And he also has this amazing book, which you're going to promote tonight, called Step into the Light. And let me just read a little bit about him real quick. Let's see. He is Italian-born Scottish author and speaker. Piero Parisetti is a medical doctor originally specializing in public health and disaster management. At the beginning of his career, employed by the International Red Cross, the United Nations, he worked in the management of large-scale humanitarian aid operations in Africa, Asia, and the former Soviet Union. At the end of year 2000, he moved from field operations to the classroom, taking up a late academic career. Until 2015, he has been professor of emergencies and humanitarian action at the Institute for International Political Studies of Milan University in Italy, and a visiting professor at several other universities. In 2004, a simple anecdote narrated by his wife triggered an intellectual interest at first, and then a true scholarly passion for psychical research, especially for the study of scientific evidence pointing to the survival of the human personality of bodily death. Dr. Parisetti is a member of the Society for Psychical Research and the International Association for Near-Death Studies, 2 professional scientific research organizations that I've heard of, and they're amazing. He collaborates with the Institute Suisse des Sciences, I can't even pronounce this, in Geneva, Switzerland. And in 2008, he published his first book, 21 Days into the Afterlife, hailed by New York Times bestselling author Michael Prescott as the best introduction I have ever seen to the survival hypothesis. The book received very complimentary reviews by specialists and lay public alike, and was translated into 6 languages, went on to become a little internet publishing success. His other books are Adventures in Psychical Research and Apparitions, Proof of Survival, and obviously Step into the Light, which we're going to be talking about this evening. So hi, everybody. Hi, Angela. Hi, Michael. Good to see you from Myrtle Beach. And without further ado, I'm going to bring on Dr. Parisetti. How are you, Dr. Parisetti?
I am very well. I'm delighted to be speaking to you and your nice audience, although as you said, it is a bit early here, or late. I confess I did have a little snooze before the interview, but now hopefully I'm geared up and very much looking forward to talking to you.
Awesome. Well, I'm looking forward to talking to you too. So I'm going to start off, and I hope you don't mind if I interrupt you, if I get excited about something that you say. I'm going to
Absolutely.
ask a lot of questions. So, you're a medical doctor. We've talked about your disaster relief. You've done a lot of work internationally. And when did you become convinced that life after death exists? Like, do you believe it 100%? Do you believe 100% that life after death exists beyond a shadow of a doubt? There's no doubt in your mind.
Ye- Well.
Well, yeah.
Let's take things in steps, right? I'm always fond of saying that, I'm a Western educated medical doctor. I'm the intellectual product of a culture that says that anything and everything that exists is matter. If you cannot touch it, if you cannot measure it with the instruments, it simply does not exist. So, and I lived happily with that, worldview for many, many years. And that worldview is so ingrained that it is difficult to let go. So I cannot point to a single episode or a single piece of evidence or a moment in which I became a believer. It's a long, arduous route to quote unquote enlightenment, or no, to simply understanding that the same evidence that I happily followed as a person of science, the same kind of evidence points points to survival. What happened, as you kindly said in the introduction, is that I was living in Geneva at the time, Geneva in Switzerland, and I remember quite well. It was about year 2005, so I was already 45 by then. We were having tea with my wife in the kitchen, and she told me this story, which is a spooky story, a nice, cute thing, and interesting, but not earth-shattering in the greater scheme of things. And the kind of story, to tell you the truth, that if you yourself or anybody else told me at the time, I would have shrugged away and say, oh, how nice, and moved on. But, she is the person I know best and the person I trust the most. And I could tell after all these years that she was still perturbed by this experience. Happened to her in Glasgow. She's from Glasgow herself, when she was a late adolescent. And so, with the stiff upper lip attitude I had at the time, I said to myself, let me see if anything serious has been written about all this stuff. And well, I immediately stumbled upon the book of a very highly credentialed academic psychologist, Professor David Fontana, member of the Royal Society. I mean, top guy. Sadly and prematurely died a few years ago. And the book, the title of the book was, Is There an Afterlife? A Review of the Evidence. So the guy was highly credentialed. It could pass my quote-unquote boggle threshold. And I read it, and those 575 pages really changed my life, because they set me on course of this passionate scholarly study. Those 500 odd pages were followed by another 30,000 and counting. At the moment, I became, as you nicely said, I became a member in these professional organizations. I went to conferences, I went to study days. I even trained personally with Dr. Raymond Moody. You may remember the first one to speak about near-death experiences in the 70s, whom I consider one of my really intellectual heroes. And this process, which still goes on to this very day and lasted for so many years, is not a one-way road. Because, old habits die hard. And you yourself, you say that at times you're skeptical. And we say, what is this? And inevitably, I've had the same kind of doubts, because it says, this is simply not possible. It's too incredible. It's too unbelievable. So doubt nags, that bites always a little bit. But then I return to my trusted evidence, and the doubts go away. So today, after this long toing and froing, this really uphill struggle, I can say to the best of my intellectual honesty that I do believe two things. Number one, that what we call mind, our personality, our memories, our perceptions, all our internal life, and I would say all our life, because there's no other life, is more than the electrochemical activity of the brain. So yes, there is a strong relationship between brain and mind, but mind is more than the physical brain. Secondly, I am convinced that in a way which we do not understand, because I do not claim to have an explanation, but the only conclusion an unbiased researcher can draw after really seriously engaging with the evidence is that in a way we do not understand human personality survives physical death. So let me wrap up all this. You asked me a simple question and I gave a very complicated answer. There was not one event or a precise point in time where I became a believer. And I call myself a believer, but I am a rational believer. I believe on the basis of the strength, the collective strength of the evidence, and I'd be happy to talk to you and to your listeners about what the kind of things I consider evidence. And
Yes.
finally, and very importantly, since I am evidence driven, I am always ready to change my position. If at some, you see what I mean?
Right.
Because I'm
Yeah.
obliged to do that. I'm
Yes.
obliged to do that
Right.
because otherwise I could not be so forthcoming
Right.
in my positions. Should I come across an explanation that can account for all the data other than the survival of personality, I would have to change my position. But I think it's a very long shot, to tell you the truth.
Okay.
At this stage, it is the evidence is such a mountain, is such an ocean, that finding something that can account for all that, I think it's difficult.
All right. Well, that was an amazing answer. Thank you so much for telling me that. Um, we like to, I'm sure some of the listeners would like to hear some of your tell us some of the most amazing, or pick one, an amazing story, maybe something that's in your book, something that maybe they could relate to that was kind of amazing to you, maybe that you've experienced or you've heard or someone you've interviewed. Is there something that kind of sticks out in your mind that
Do
is pretty amazing?
you have about a month, don't we, to talk about such things?
Yeah, just
No.
whatever is the
Yeah.
first thing that pops up to your mind,
Right.
would be
So let me
great.
say to begin with that. Let me say that I'm 60, very recently turned 62, and it is clear to me that this incarnation of mine is not an incarnation for experiencing. So I did not have any paranormal experience myself, despite having such a strong interest in the field. I'm not the kind of guy, because of personality, who goes ghost hunting and such things. This incarnation of mine is an incarnation of learning, of thinking. And since I have this gift, because I know, I mean, after many years of teaching at uni, I know that I'm good at communicating, I'm good at writing, I'm good at explaining, and so it's this life of mine seems to be made for acquiring a lot of knowledge, analyzing, compacting, and bringing this knowledge back to different audiences. This what I seem to be born for. Having said all that, and gosh, this may take a little time, but it's really interesting. What I trained on with Dr. Moody is one of the various techniques we have now in the field of what we call assisted after-death communication. So psychological techniques that have proven capable of facilitating an experience of contact with the other side and with persons in the other side.
What do you, I'm sorry, I have to cut in there.
Mm-hmm.
What do you mean a psychological technique?
Have you heard of EMDR, eye movement, since
Yes.
Yes,
I have to stop you there because I had a crazy experience with this that could not be explained. Okay. I have to get into this. I talk about this a lot on the show. I do have, I do have a CPTSD. So I have a trauma in the past that I do have symptomology come back, and I was told that EMDR could help. And I went in and I told the person sitting there, and you have to trust the person that's going to be able to guide you if you go somewhere that, you can't really get out. So he knew I was a medium. And as soon as he started, he said, "Oh, we take you into this meditation and we take you into this garden, and it starts there." Well, everything that he took people through that went according to plan did not go according to plan for me. I immediately saw many things that actually foreshadowed the death of my father 3 weeks later.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
And thank you. And I also communicated with the psychotherapist's father on the other side, and I had an animal, a spirit animal, come and take me. It had me in its claws. It wasn't like any mediumship experience I've ever had. It was a journey. It took me, and I was taken and shown different aspects of things that were a puzzle piece that 3 weeks later it made sense, and it scared me. And when I came out of it, I told him what happened, and he just sat there and didn't know what to say or what to do. And that scared me even more. And I just said, if you're going to be guiding me, I am not going to come back here and go through the experience and having a guide that doesn't know what to do with me. Yeah, I know. So no one's been able to explain why EMDR took me into that experience and foreshadowed, something horrible that was going to happen.
Marisa, to tell you the truth, you speak to you read the book by Piero herself, and they don't know why EMDR works as psychotherapy. They simply have no idea, and they're very upfront without that. Let alone bizarre experiences like the one you had, and the kind of utilizations we do in assisted after-death communication. The mechanisms why EMDR works are not clear to anybody. We only know that it works and it has good clinical results on the patients. And what happened is exactly the kind of experience you've had, but in a positive sense. Remember that you went into this session with already a much broad and a much more open kind of sensitivity than anybody else, because you're an intuitive, you're a sensitive. I'm talking about using EMDR and other techniques with quote unquote normal people who are completely closed.
Normal.
You see what I mean?
So you're saying that EMDR is an assisted methodology to communicate with the other side. Is that what you're saying to me?
Correct. This
Wow.
is what happened.
Nobody explained that to me.
In the early 1990s, Dr. Carl Botkin, who is a clinical psychologist working with veterans with the VA in the United States, and as you know, many veterans suffer from the same kind of ailment you do, PTSD, after their experiences. And Dr. Botkin was trying to use EMDR to help these people out of their post-traumatic stress condition. And to his total, complete amazement, these veterans started having experiences of connection, exactly,
Wow. Wow.
with deceased person. In their case, mostly fellow soldiers and army people and all the rest, but also with deceased relatives and everything. And after, and what is interesting is that the veterans who had been suffering for PTSD for years and years, in the absence of practically any clinical improvement, despite all the therapies, after this one experience of reunion, all their symptoms were gone. It's very interesting. So, as a
Well,
clinical
none of my
psychologist,
symptoms of reunion is gone, but I talk to people every day, and it's not taking away the PTSD. So I don't.
yeah, but I mean, but because your PTSD is not linked to the people you talk to. You see what I mean? For this, yes, for these soldiers, their experience of reunion was linked directly with the
Yes.
trauma that put them in trouble. Okay, your case is very different. So. After having read, because there's EMDR and there are other techniques. With Dr. Moody, I studied the psychomantium methodology, which essentially consists in gazing into a mirror in a darkened room after a long and relatively complicated psychological preparation. Anyhow, there are various techniques which have been demonstrated to facilitate, to be conducive to experiences of reunion in a high percentage of cases. And so I wanted to experiment myself with this. And I did with a few people, few volunteers, because I was saying, nothing is guaranteed. I do this for my own interest and let's see what happens. And that kind of attitude and setting. And I had, in a few cases, absolutely nothing happened. In a few cases, there were maybe a few signs or signals, and let's call them interesting. But one case was absolutely spectacular, and that's the closest thing I've had myself to an experience, to witnessing something happening. And I remember this man was in his early 50s, Greek-American, high official of the United Nations in Geneva, as tough as they come, right? New Yorker, Greek-American, rah, 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 that really, I mean, the last person you would expect to be interested in these things. But he said, no, you see what I mean? And he said, no, but I'm really interested. Not that I have anything particular, because my mom and dad died 10 years ago. And it was okay. I did not particularly suffer. There are a couple of things that were left unsaid. As a medium, this is often the case. There were a few things that were left hanging, and I often thought about that. So I'm not coming here out of a strong desire or a strong need. I'm just interested in the process. So we did about 2 hours of EMDR and to and froing, and we attacked one of the two issues he said that he wanted to sort of work on. And at the end of the 2 hours, we both understood he had made good progress psychologically in going back to memories and solving some of this, that particular hanging issue, but nothing unusual had happened. And at that stage, I said to him, shall we call it a day? And he says, listen, I mean, I came all this way and we did this. Why don't we go on another little bit and let's tackle the other problem and see what happens? And so we did. And at some stage, Marisa, you know how the technique goes. You give this eye movement with your fingers, and then you tell to the person now, lie back and relax, close your eyes and tell me what's coming to you. And at some stage he says, oh, this is really interesting. I can see very clearly the kitchen where we're having our dinner and meals with the family back when I was young. And so I bring him back and say, this is very interesting. Let's dig more into that. Please try to remember what color was the tablecloth, where the light came in from the window, what smell was there in the kitchen. Make that, that memory and experience alive. And I give the eye movements again. I say, now lie back, relax, and tell me what happens. And he remains silent for a good 5 minutes. And I'm sitting there, and he's sitting there in the recliner. And I'm saying, gosh, has he fallen asleep? What's going on here? And then all of a sudden, like somebody had stabbed him in the back, with something very pointy. He jerks up, opens his eyes, looks around, and it's like he doesn't know where he finds himself. And then he wells up in tears. He comes and hugs me, and crying, he's saying, I saw them. I saw my mom and dad, and they told me exactly what I needed to hear. And we stood there, two grown-up men, hugging each other. I was crying myself. He was crying uncontrollably. Remember, New Yorker. Career person in the UN, Greek American, really, he was gone. And for me, I was crying myself because I was witnessing something so important, so almost sacred. He was so touched by the experience that he spoke about that to everybody in the office. The next day it was a mess. Imagine the United Nations High Commissioner for the Refugees, a mess. Anyhow, and then he wanted to put his experience in writing, and I have his letter to this day. And he says, if I quote him correctly, something like, masses of energy is how I would describe what I've seen. But to the fact that the personality of my father and mother, I have no doubt this was a completely life-transforming experience. And that was the closest I have come after studying. The evidence I talk about comes from about a dozen different fields of investigation. After-death communication is one of them, but there's near-death experiences, deathbed visions, apparitions, reincarnation studies, and blah, and blah, and blah. And all these things I have studied and learned on books, in conferences, and not directly. This was the one episode where I was exposed myself to something, mind you, to something clearly out of the ordinary. Clearly, I say sacred because for that person, it was literally a life-transforming event. I could also quote a couple of experiences with public readings from star mediums here in Scotland that were literally out of this world, as you know.
Yeah. So I have to tell you that you talking about how his experience started with the kitchen table when he was younger. My experience when I went there, which was a total journey, different from my mediumship, started in a house where I was younger that I hadn't been to in a long time. And it started the exact same way that you're talking about, but it didn't get to go anywhere. But I remember the dread and the horror of the feeling when I was in that house, and I just felt like something is wrong here, and if the person knew what they were doing, they might have had me go deeper into that. They might have had me move into that a little bit more.
But they don't know, they don't
Yeah.
expect this kind of experiences. And
Yeah.
again, really hat off to Dr. Botkin and the others for recognizing the potential there and going with that.
But how many psychotherapists actually know that this can take you to the other side? How many people really know about this? I mean, I've to a lot of therapists, nobody that do an EMDR, and they don't know about this.
Zero.
Like
The world of, I mean, myself, after, so let me give a couple of definitions, because you've spoken about in the introduction about psychical research, and people nowadays don't really know what psychical research is. Psychical research is but is not used really, as I say, is the combination of what we today call parapsychology, the study of unexplained human potential, like thought reading, telepathy, telekinesis, the influence of thoughts on matter, precognition, your experience of being able to see into the future, remote viewing, the ability to see to seeing at the distance, all these faculties that humans have, demonstrably scientifically proven capacities of man. The study of these is parapsychology. Take that and add the study of evidence for survival, mash them together, and you have psychical research. Today, afterlife, we'd rather speak about afterlife science. I speak about psychical research because for myself, in my case, my particular focus of interest is applied psychical research. Being a medical doctor, being a former humanitarian, I've always been keenly interested in helping others. I believe that I came to this world to try to prevent or to avoid preventable suffering. Let's speak it like that. Let's say it like that. So immediately as I started reading about the afterlife, I understood, as you know very well from your own experience as a medium, that all this evidence from afterlife studies can be very helpful for people who are grieving, for people who are in pain over the loss of a loved one. And then I also realized that the same material, the same knowledge can be transformative for people who are in fear of death. And this is my latest book, Step into the Light. All my work up to a couple of years ago has been directed to trying to help the bereaved. And with my latest work, I turned my attention to those who are in fear of death. They don't know what's going to happen to them or to a loved one, and etc. So this I called applied psychical research. Now, we have good, again, scientific evidence that knowledge about life after life, knowledge about what we call afterlife science, can be very helpful for these two categories of people. And here I reconnect to your question. Mm-hmm. If I try to talk about these things to the professionals, to the psychotherapist, to the grief counselors, there's complete closure. There's nothing to do. That world remains impenetrable to our arguments and our ideas and our experiences. And that is really a shame. And when I'm being interviewed, I'm always extremely happy to do so, but I'm always interviewed by people who are already convinced, who are already in the know, and people who are, quote unquote, don't get me wrong, in the margins. You are not, you don't have, well, you do as a medium, how can I say, but you're not an established grief counselor. People come to you because they want help with their grief, but you don't belong to the established system of grief counseling. And I keep thinking, I don't know how to break into this world. I mean, my book, not because it's my book. I take me out of the equation, but I mean, what's in Step into the Light should be commonly available in hospices, in people, in places where people are facing imminent death, because this knowledge can literally transform the fear of dying. When you understand that you're not going really to die, that death as we understand it does not really exist, this lifts a lot of the worries and the anguish and the preoccupation. And
So, in your book, in your Step into the Light book, are these interviews that you've done with people who have near-death experience? What tell us about what types of stories can we see in there?
I don't know. I'm sure it is. They are as popular in the United States as they are here in Europe. Have you heard of the Lonely Planet travel guides?
No.
Lonely Planet? Haha, that's a very good, that's a very interesting model, because the publisher essentially, and this has been going on for years and years and years, they collect reports from people who have traveled to places, they edit them, they put them together in a nice way, and they produce travel guides. And so you get a very local knowledge about things, you know, from people who go to holiday in Thailand, and there are people who go to 5-star hotels and resorts, and there are the backpackers who go, you know, off the beaten tracks, etc. Put all those experiences together with the trips and suggestions and descriptions, and you have a Lonely Planet guide. So what I thought of doing to help those who are in fear of death is to try to put together a Lonely Planet guide to the afterlife. A description, you see, a description.
That's cool. That's really cool.
A description of the process of death, the moment of death, and what happens afterwards. Not based on, you know, I could have gone and see what different religions say about the process or speculate or imagine. No, I thought of looking at the testimony we have from people who have direct knowledge of this, of all that. And there's plenty, there's a lot of testimony. And I considered 3 categories of sources. One, those who have deathbed visions. Number 2, those who have near-death experiences. And number 3, those who claim to be discarnate personalities, that is, people who once lived on Earth and now go on living in what we call the spirit world, for lack of a better word, and communicate with us through mediums such as yourself and many other ways. Before looking at the trip reports, in a way, if you want to use the Lonely Planet analogy, before looking at the trip reports, however, being a rationalist, I wanted to make sure, and I want my readers to be sure, that those sources are indeed who or what they claim to be. So the first part of the book is really a bit of a CSI-style scientific investigation, because we dissect the phenomenon of deathbed vision, near-death experience, and afterlife communication. We look at all possible alternative explanations that have been proposed, and we see that none of them can account for the evidence. So this, I'm really summarizing because we go into some depth, because I want my readers to be as convinced as I am, rationally convinced that these sources are credible, that we can trust them without being taken for a ride. The second part of the book is a compilation, is not only quote after quote after quote. There's a lot of quotes from these sources directly, but there's a little bit of introduction and framing and putting things together on my part. So I would like to believe, and what the feedback, that the book went out in early April, And the feedback I'm getting is that it is both scholarly and easy to read, and that's the best the
Yeah.
best compliment I can get. So
Yeah.
we look at the days before death, particularly through. Are you familiar with deathbed visions? Because everybody knows
Yes.
about NDEs, but less
Yeah. Can you
people
talk
know.
a little bit more about deathbed
Aha,
visions for our audience to tell them
absolutely.
kind of
This
on
is
average
super,
what happens?
super interesting. And now we get into my territory, which is numbers and
Yeah.
data and blah blah. So we know from research that about 10% of us are conscious at the moment of passing. Okay,
Mhm.
the majority of us are not because of disease or various other conditions.
Does
Of
this
that,
include like morphine?
possibly yes. Uh-huh.
So if somebody is on morphine, can they still have a deathbed vision?
Unlikely,
Hmm.
because they're dulled. The senses are dulled, and they're in sort of this in times induced coma and blah blah.
Hmm.
So of that 10%, and if you think of the number of people dying every day, 10% is still a staggering number. Of that 10%, 2/3 have deathbed visions. And deathbed
Wow.
visions, it's amazing. The
Yeah.
numbers are enormous to the point that DBVs, to use a shorter, just an acronym, are less known by the general public, although many people, when you speak about that, they say, oh, that's true. When my dad died, this and this
Hmm.
happened. And, there's a lot of family anecdotes about that. But the subject is taught at university level for in nursing schools, because nurses are the ones most likely to witness this, because they are the people close to the patients when
Hmm.
in the before their death. So the phenomenon happens between 24 and 48 hours before the actual passing. Okay, and a person who was slumped and maybe ill and maybe at times not even entirely conscious, all of a sudden, like my Greek American friend, they perk up, they sit up in bed, they brighten up, and they start describing visions of what appears to be the afterlife, and they interact, they have long, convoluted conversations with people that they say they're deceased relatives, who are said to have come to help them over, to help them in the transition.
I'm getting chills like when you talk
And
about
listen,
this.
and listen, get
Wow.
make sure you and your audience understand these two very crucial points of evidence. In a number, and I mean talk about dozens and dozens of well-documented and well-researched cases, people having DBVs talk to dead relatives they did not know they were dead at the moment the vision takes place. This is
What?
extraordinary. This is
What?
extraordinary in itself. Really.
How does that happen that they don't know somebody's dead?
Because they don't imagine talking to their dead mother, and as they talk to their maybe dead mother and father, a sister pops up, and they didn't know the sister had died. They were
Wow.
not told the sister had died, but she has, and she comes through from the other side, and this is marvelous. So
Yeah.
that is a complete spanner in the wheel of any materialist explanation. How do you account for that, if this is not a true experience of after-death communication? So this is one element which is extraordinary. The other element, which for me is equally powerful, is that it is well demonstrated that people, listen to me, people who think they will die but recover do not have these visions.
Wait.
People who think they will recover but end up dying do have these visions. This tells us that is the proximity to the moment of physical death that triggers the experience. It is like as we approach real death, not what we imagine will be death, but real death, as we approach, the filter of our brain widens, and the doors to perception open. We become a little bit like mediums, like yourself. We can peek into the reality we are about to step into. Very, very interesting.
Yeah. I have a question. Sorry to
Please.
interrupt, but
Not at all.
when the people having these deathbed visions, do they see visually their relatives as see-through, or do they see them as completely in matter and like you and me?
Very, very like apparitions. There's a range of things.
There's a range.
A complete range, with the two extremes that you mentioned. You've got again. I mean, and in the book there's plenty of quotes from these experiences, and you will see what happens. I don't want to. No, I'll stop there because then we go into.
Yeah.
No, what the point I'm making here is that just that. Take just that, Marisa. Think what the two major fears we all have about dying is, number one, of course, the one of ceasing to exist. That, all the worldly experience, or our thoughts, our memories, and our life will come to an end, and there will be a black nothingness. And that's very, very difficult, a very scary perspective for many. We don't want that. And well, evidence and the testimony tell us that that's not the case, that there's a very rich life after this life. And the other fear is the one of dying alone. Many people are scared of dying alone. Well, deathbed visions tell us that we do not. We die surrounded by the warmth and the comfort of our loved one who have passed before us. And if should there be no loved ones, there's good testimony for the fact that there are wise spirits from the other side who come over and assist the person in the process of transition. Why not everybody has deathbed visions? We don't know. I am very frank and absolute. Why don't everybody who has a cardiac arrest have a near-death experience? I don't know. Nobody knows. There are explanations, though, that maybe everybody does have, no explanation, or I mean, there are sort of possible explanations. For instance, maybe everybody does have deathbed visions, but only 2/3 of them report them. For the other third, maybe this experience is an internal thing, is a very private experience. They don't communicate it, so we really don't know. But the numbers are so massive that this is established as a true human experience. And so the good news is that we don't die alone.
Thank you so much for telling us that.
If I may say so, because the big one of the big scares is, oh gosh, the moment of death must be terrible. The moment of actual death is consistently described as a non-event. The transition between material life and non-material life, from the point of view of the stream of consciousness, is a non-event. You see all the testimony and say people say there's nothing different in my self-perceptions and thoughts and memories, and critically in our affections, the moment before my body stopped working and the moment after my body stopped working. If there is a difference, and that is described as a dramatic difference, is for those people who were in pain or in discomfort before the moment of passing. That is the signal that death has occurred. Because all of a sudden they say, oh my God, I was in agonizing pain or discomfort on labored breath, and all that is gone. What happened to me? That is the signal that death has occurred. But if suffering is not present before death, life in the material body and in the non-material body is exactly the same. And that's also very good news, I think, if we are to trust these sources that we established, that I wouldn't say beyond reasonable doubt, but it is very reasonable to trust them. And then we go on to the afterlife, which, as you will have heard from your communicators many times, is not one, is actually a series of experiences at different levels, if you want. The initial levels are closer to our material reality. That is the level where, for instance, apparitions happen, where ghosts appear. These ghosts appear from the lower, quote unquote, lower levels of the
levels.
afterlife. And then by a natural, organic, inevitable process, we soar up. I always liken this to, a tiny bubble of air at the bottom of the ocean that inevitably has to rise up and expand and become bigger and less dense and, go to higher levels. That is a natural process of progression through these various layers or stages of the afterlife.
Yes, I'm very aware of the different levels. In fact, as my mediumship progressed over the years, when I thought there were only 3, there comes to be a lot more than that. And I call it level 0. I call the earthbound level 0, and then there's levels below that which I don't deal with. And there are,
I understand. Yes.
Yes. Some people, I have Angela here. She asks, I want to know where my dead friends go when they die from their alcoholism or addictions. And I have written a whole book that's not published on that called Unsaid.
You should because this is a very this is a very important subject which is addressed. Why don't you answer that question, and then I see if we are on the same page.
The same page. Well, alcoholism and addiction is a much different contract when they come here to the earth plane, and to actually move through the different levels that we need to move through spiritually. A person that actually comes that has addiction or alcoholism has a great spiritual contract. And a lot of people that die of this disease think it's, are reduced to lower levels. Let's just say that. But that is you're not coming to earth and saying, oh, I'll take the mission of dying this way or that way. With alcoholism or addiction, it's kind of like a gamble. It's saying, well, if you do pass this test, you advance about 7 levels on the other side rather than 1, first of all. And second of all, the addict or alcoholic has a lot of free will choices that they can either raise consciousness a great degree through their experience of transformation, or they could destroy. So that actual spiritual contract is for great spirits. And when somebody dies of that before their time, before they're ready to go, of alcoholism or addiction, they are actually, and this is very detailed stuff, but they're actually acting as a parasite for other, at the late stage of their addiction on the earth plane, actually acting as a parasite for no more than 3 spirits who have passed of alcoholism or addiction before, that are actually have cords attached to the person in late stage addiction. They're actually pulling their energy and feeling like what it would feel like to get high or get drunk again. So they're essentially a portal to the other side. And once the spirits that are parasitic will attach to usually strong younger males at the time. And then when that person gets to a late stage addiction where their body gets worn, the parasites don't have any interest in them anymore. But there is rehab on the other side. There are places where people go, and there's levels where there's suicides that go to certain levels. There's levels with people that die of alcoholism or their addiction, and there's levels where people go that actually surpass the contract. So that's as much detail as I could give on that.
I'm also curious to hear from you. My view, and that again, it's what I like to believe. What I'm not entirely 100% sure, but this is not a rational belief. This is a belief. But I think that I have plenty of good suggestions that this might be the case. That despite this, I mean, I think that, the addictions are one of the classic triggers or motives or reasons behind earthbound spirits. I mean, that people who really have, they remain very attracted to the earthly plane. They remain magnetically pulled back to their experience because of the addiction. But my inkling is that regardless of that, in the end, all will be well.
Yes.
Isn't it?
Yes.
Whether through intervention of guides and helpers on the other side, or by the process I described as this inevitable, organic, natural soaring, even the heavier souls, the souls with the strongest attachments to the material world, eventually will soar.
Yes.
I'm not sure of that, but I think this is likely to be the case. You would agree with that?
Yeah. Through my mediumship, I have every medium kind of attracts different types of spirits. And for a long time in my career, I attracted male spirits who have died of addiction young, and their parents would come to me. And if they came about 3 times, usually the first time was the most intense, most heavy experience. And as they came back, you would see that they've upped a level. They've gotten lighter. And usually there comes a point where I tell the parent, you don't need to keep coming back because they've gone to the other side. And usually somebody comes to get them. It's kind of like taking somebody to college. Whenever I see that person holding the hand of somebody that's already crossed over, I know that they're telling me we're getting ready to, it's like the transition from the earth life to death. There is also the same transition from earthbound to the other side that they have to go through. So usually, and it is the free will of the spirit if they want to stay or they want to go. But there are people who are always there ready to help them to have that understanding. And earthbound spirits, interestingly enough, who pass some addiction, their nails grow long. They look very unkempt. They grow beards. They don't look shaven. They look unkempt. And then they unkempt. And then as they come back time and time again through the mediumship, then they're like radiant and they have light beams behind them. And they have to go through that learning process of something that they couldn't go through here. And when they do move through the levels on the other side, depending on where they're going to go. But I have seen rehabs on the other side as well. So
there you go.
Yeah. So, but I did want to bring up Lori's comment too, based on what you were talking about before, Dr. Parisetti. She said, so true. She had this experience. My mom sat up and was very conscious of the 2 relatives who had passed that came to visit. When I gave her permission to go, if she wanted to, she shook her head no and waited till the next night to pass away. I think she was waiting for my dad or sister. So she
fantastic.
Had this experience.
This is extraordinary.
Yeah, you could use this in your book. Yeah,
precisely.
Well, let's tell people, because we're coming to the end of the hour. Let's tell people how they could get your book, Step into the Light, which I'm definitely getting a copy of, like very soon.
You were sent in all your track feed, but I sent you an electronic copy, so you already have it.
And you did?
I'll send that again. Yes, no,
yes.
Hey, come on. No, like,
Thank
listen,
you so
I
much.
wanted here, I wanted just 1 minute before we finish, I wanted to say how thankful I am to you and frankly to the other hosts that have me as a speaker, because your work is just as important as mine. Because if I did not have a channel to make this knowledge available to people, to more people, I would be writing for myself, and that's not the point. I mean, I don't make any real money from these books and everything. These books are written, and it's work done really in the hope that more people will know about these things and more people will become rationally convinced about life after life, and the life can be transformed. So I think the best way to get to me and to my work is the website you have on screen, drparisetti.com, and there people will find free articles, an entire free book on apparitions, on ghostly things, and then my previous books and the latest one. So you can look it up on Amazon, but the best thing is to visit drparisetti.com. You will find everything there.
Where a lot of our listeners they've been quiet. Usually they're commenting they've been quiet because they have been listening to every
Praised.
single thing you said. So
This
please,
is so nice. Thank you.
please, everybody, go and get a copy of Dr. Parisetti's book. I cannot wait to read it. And I just appreciate the clinical perspective, because it gives so much more credibility to what I do as a medium, because I don't have that perspective. And Lisa, she says, very interesting and comforting information. So you've made a difference here, Dr. Parisetti, with a lot of people that are watching tonight. And this interview is going to be shared with a lot more people.
That was a very late night, fully justified. And I feel
Yes.
blessed for this. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And thanks everybody for coming to the lounge tonight. We will see you for the office and for the lounge next week. Have a great weekend. Bye-bye.